Hello and welcome to Lessons for Full Spectrum Humans. This is part 2 of the lesson about the sun's senses, but this continues the topic about unresolved energy or pain and the interstices. Now, first of all, what do I mean when I refer to the interstices? And it is time for me to go back to this very basic shape that I have drawn in my artwork and in the teachings for this course over and over and over. It is this 4-vortex shape, the 4 time vortexes, and the understanding that this is made up of timelines, right? But in previous lessons, I have spoken about how all of those timelines, actually each one has at the end of it a little last moment, that little bubble being the final culmination of consciousness, of the journey of this little red conscious awareness as it's journeying on there, almost like if you could imagine accumulating, like vacuuming up or accumulating experiences until what you are left with is your last moment. And that this flowing membrane here, which I have described as the membrane of death, is actually comprised of all of the last moments of every single possible version of you. So when we understand that in the shorthand of this sketch, it is not necessary for me to draw every single one of the little lines. You simply understand that this is made up of all of these little last moments, okay? That is very, very, very important. I'm going to erase this and draw it at a bigger scale so you can really see what's going on. Here's a big fat line. And here's the other, big fat line, right? And here is one of the timelines that goes up to here. And here is a last moment. You could think of it as, like a person, right? Like frozen in their last moment, but that's very anthropomorphic. And what we are doing here is moving and stretching into a non-anthropomorphic interpretation. So perhaps it is better to envision it, the little blue dot, as a last moment, almost as a snapshot, like this being like a snapshot of that person, their life, their mind, their consciousness, everything that they can remember up to that moment. Now, what else do we know about this blue dot over here? We know that this blue dot is part of a flowing membrane of energy that's flowing in this direction. We know it's flowing in this direction because that goes back to the beginning so that all of these timelines can start again over there, okay? And what I'm trying to get across here is the idea that if everything goes the way it is supposed to go, this blue dot of experiences becomes unraveled or disassembled and flows back here in a sense like it has been unmade into its abstract blocks of energy, then it is reassembled into a new formation. All right? And when I talk about the interstices, what I'm really talking about is this portion of reality is actually a meniscus or a membrane in between 2 different dimensions. One of the dimensions is created by the movement of energy in a linear fashion, like this, and one of the dimensions is created by the movement of energy in a circular fashion, like this. And the energy that is flowing, like this, it can't just go like this. It would meet this flowing membrane of death. And this flowing membrane of death we now understand as a focuser of consciousness, because there is only one way to get out of this area over here if one wishes to exit it, and that is by focusing your consciousness until you go through a little wormhole that's located right about there, okay? And I have spoken about in previous lessons the type of negative vibrational lower thought entities who are mostly engaged in service to self pursuits, who occupy these interstices. They've been called demons in the past, but what they really are unresolved energy patterns. They are aspects of consciousness. So now, let's say from this blue dot, I want to enlarge the blue dot, okay, until you see it as a very, very big dot. And then within that dot, I want to say that there's a certain amount of, blue consciousness, right? But then there's also a certain amount of red consciousness. And let's say that blue consciousness is like who you really are. It is like your core, or it is part of the divine nature of the universe. And let's say that red consciousness is just filler. Let's say that it's not anything that really exists. It's lies, it's distortions, it's perturbations in the field, it's all of that stuff, because when we talk about even the timelines, even this time cone, we talk about the central core timeline and who you really are, that goes up to infinity, and then we talk about all of these peripherals that aren't the real you. And this is all about focusing consciousness and paring away what is not the real you, or refining away what is not the real you into consciousness that is pure and that is the real you. Well, upon death, upon the moment of death, the motion of this flow of energy, and when I say flow of energy, it is analogous to the flow of time. That is the type of flow. It is a flow of energy happening in a higher dimensional state, not exactly like the flow of energy of, I'm thinking of, water in a tube or something that is a very physical third dimensional event. So the flow of energy causes these different types of consciousness here, and they're different in the sense of their density. They have different qualities to them. That flow of energy causes these different qualities of energy to do different things. And if all goes well, this blue ball, these energies, they get, as I said, dissolved or resolved, sent back to the beginning, reassembled, and then they are reprocessed. But what happened about 10 or 12,000 years ago was many beings died. They entered into this realm between worlds, this meniscus, this interstice, and they could not leave. Or we could say they chose not to leave. It's a lot of semantics, but let's say there was not an exit for them to leave, and they have been occupying that space for a very long time. In lesson 18 of the initiatory materials that I recorded, I gave galactic history all about this, and what I'm drawing here in this picture is the graphic representation of what happened. Essentially, a lot of consciousness came as in people's final moments and occupied these interstices, but then they did not go along with the flow and, become disassembled and go back into the refinery of consciousness that is the universe. They stayed where they were. They did not get refined. So you have consciousness here that, like this, contains some little amount of divinity, even if it's a tiny little spark, even if it's a tiny little dot, some tiny amount of divinity, and also a lot of red filler, just a lot of things that are lies and distortions and ego trips and pettiness and things that aren't the real divine consciousness at all. And those beings fed themselves essentially by farming the beings that still have bodies, because these beings over here, they're no longer in the flow of time. They're not having experiences. They're not eating food, physical food, but they are not higher dimensional creatures. They are not beings of pure love who can eat pure love. So because they were trapped in that position, they did what they needed to do. They created this whole elaborate economy to drain energy off of living beings. And when I say living beings, I mean the particles that are still here in this dimension traveling in this direction. So yeah, here's the abstract image. You're a particle, you're traveling in this direction, and this being over here is actually interacting with you and taking a little bit of your energy all from you, all throughout your life, in order to feed itself. This is the economy of hell. This is from lesson 18, and you can read all about it. I explained it here in a very abstract manner. Try not to get angry when you watch the lesson. The reason for that is that anger is one of the ways in which these beings feed off of you during your lifetime. So there is some interaction, some mental interaction between these beings over here and these beings over here, okay? Like you can hear thoughts and comments from the peanut gallery. These beings over here trying to say negative thoughts and comments and get an emotional reaction and elicit an emotional response from these beings here. Of course, meditation and mindfulness help beings here not to be drawn astray by the comments from the peanut gallery, from these beings over here, and to be able to maintain one's course, stay in connection with the divine, and make it to that infinity wormhole. So this is the advanced course, and it is definitely time for me to talk about what we do with these beings over here, because I send them back to the great central sun for recycling. So this is a picture of our galaxy from the side view, or not our galaxy, a galaxy from the side view. So you understand that these are all the spiral arms, but we're just looking at it as if it is a plate on its side. And you can see, coming from the center, that this is energy. This is actually energy that would not be visible to the human eye, but it has been colored for this picture. And really at the center, what is emanating that energy, there is a supermassive black hole. There's a supermassive black hole at the center of each galaxy. That's why it's okay for me to just use any picture, because the same thing is happening at the center of our Milky Way as here in this picture. There is a center of consciousness. And just like I said to you previously, the sun and the sun's heliosphere is the center of consciousness for that localized reality. The galactic center is the center of consciousness for the galaxy, and that is an incredibly large amount of area to cover. Consciousness is on its journey of being refined from each one of these little tiny stars out here. And so this is like where, the sun is located, right? Like one of these little places out here. When I say that I send these blue beings here that occupy or are trapped in the interstices, I send them back to the sun for recycling. What I mean is, what the experience is, I am sitting in meditation, or, throughout my day, I might have an intrusive thought, like here I am, this red particle, just trying to move forward through time and observe the flow of time throughout my day. And then one of these peanut gallery people who is stuck here and can't eat real food wants to make me angry. So they shoot like an unpleasant thought into my mind, into my experience. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get me to go off course, to stop being in alignment with this beautiful core central timeline and to drift off maybe over to here. And in doing so, to let off energy that it can then eat, usually in the form of anger or sadness or being upset or anxious. This is called the human condition. This is not just happening to me. This is happening to every single human on the planet at the moment. And the reason it is happening is because of a flawed operating system. Remember that yellow, here I am, yellow, the level of the solar plexus, the mind that that was foisted upon you, that you had installed into you as a child, is a flawed operating system. Not only does it cut you off from your divine connection to the source and make it difficult for you to be able to be a real-time conductor of information back to the sun, but it also allows these beings here trapped in the interstices to steadily siphon off your vital energy that you get from the source throughout your life. That's not a very good position to be in. Like, those are always really very hard realizations. When I just make those statements like that, like, that's terrible. It's like saying Hitler's on the march and the Nazis are at the borders of your country. It's like really terrible, terrible news. But the positive news is that everything has changed and shifted in the past in the past 10 or 12 years, since the creation of the Flying Rainbow Lasagna, things have radically shifted. And so in my experience, when I'm sitting in meditation and these peanut gallerists comment to me, I've told you in the past about all sorts of different defensive techniques, thinking of like a mirror or a reflective surface that sends their comments back to them is effective. But at a certain point, I realized that they were actually sending me energy. And I told you that this is an economy. This is the economy of hell. These beings here, they live in the interstices. They have access to very few resources. They don't generate any resources. They don't get connected to the source. All they can get is what they can siphon off from over here. People in that position are usually very penurious or very stringent with their budgets. So they don't want to have to send out energy unless they're going to get energy back. It's literally a business. These beings only want to send out energy if they know that they're going to get energy back. So once I understood that, I understood that instead of reflecting their energy back to them, with some kind of an energy mirror, I could keep their energy, not be blown off course, and kind of tuck it away into a little interdimensional slush fund. So that's what I started doing. And what that felt like was when I would sit in meditation and one of these negative thought, barbs would be shot into me, I would catch it. I wouldn't let it harm me. I wouldn't let it make me feel upset or change my emotions in any way. I would say, look at that. I see that this being just tried to shoot me. And I take that energy and I keep it. And then I was able to, not only did I not lose energy from veering off into anger, sadness, grief, sorrow, all of those reactions, but I managed to accrue quite a collection of extra interdimensional slush fund energy. And these beings began to find out that they were just losing money. They kept on throwing energy at me and kept on not getting energy back, and it made them want to stop. But you know something? It's not okay to be constantly attacked. You don't have to live your life as a red particle, moving forward in time, constantly being impinged upon by these blue characters here, because the truth is, this is a very unnatural setup. This is like a bubble or a blip. It's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be you enter into the interstices, you are unmade, and you go with the flow of consciousness into your next incarnation. These beings aren't doing that. So to give you more of a characterization, these beings, they are very similar to the mythological stories of the sorcerers told in tales by Carlos Castaneda of ancient Mexican sorcerers who made pacts with various higher dimensional creatures so that they would die, but they wouldn't die. They would achieve a type of vampiric status or immortality, but only in the sense that they could be alive if they continued to feed off of the energy of the living. Well, this is where we get these stories from. There actually are creatures that live that way, and they've actually been running your lives and human society for a very long time. Now, we talk about sending them back to the central sun. What that means is when these beings, when I began to recognize them and keep the energy that I wanted to keep, and if it was a violent attack, like sometimes these attacks would be even violent, I could cut off that limb. What I mean is, like, imagine an energetic tentacle that was, like, trying to force itself into me. I could cut off that limb, and I could keep that limb, and I could use it as a kind of trophy. And they then were losing a limb. These blue guys didn't have a limb with which to attack me or others anymore. But then I realized that every single one of these beings, these blue beings over here, they're a symbol, just like I was speaking in the previous segment of this lesson, with neurons, and you have like a tube with water flowing through it, and your nerves are supposed to be like the tubes carrying the water. And if you crimp that tube, then there's a blockage over here, and the water can't flow, and it develops pain. That's the feeling of having your leg fall asleep because it is, the nerves are compressed, or sciatic pain comes from the compression of nerves. Well, what you've got over here in these demonic beings that occupy the interstices, You have essentially the accumulated pain of the galaxy. You have neural impulses or consciousnesses. These are all, remember, last moments of a being who died. But these beings did not get a chance to be unmade. They didn't get a chance to let go of their ego, their sense of identity, who they were in their previous life, to forgive all of the things that were done to them that hurt them, and to forgive themselves for hurting others, to become reacquainted with the consciousness that exists here, the divine consciousness, and then to reset their lives from that beginning, from that divine consciousness. So I send them back here because it is the most divinely merciful thing to do. I send them back to the galactic center where this refinement process goes on. Let me choose a different color. This refinement process goes on. We begin to divide out the divine characteristics. You know, this blue, these little sparks of blue, from this red, which is mostly noise. It's mostly noise. It's like static on the line. It's like chaos or things that are just nonsense. In order to make music, or in order to establish a pattern, what you do is you cancel out the static. Get rid of the noise. Get rid of everything that is not an intentional signal. And then you are left only with this, the intentional signal. That is God consciousness. So these beings, these blue beings that have been stuck for millennia in the interstices, feeding off of the energy of the living, they are almost totally underacquainted with who they are in terms of God consciousness, with who they are as divine beings. I send their energy back to the great galactic sun. This is called having a sun bath. If you are like this person in this picture here, all of their chakras are in perfect alignment, everything is perfectly clear, all of their energy is flowing. If you put that person in the great central sun, there would be almost no change. It's like taking a person who's already got a perfect diet and perfect exercise program and perfect body and, putting them on a special regimen. There's almost no change. They don't need to change. They are already where they need to be. But if you take one of these beings that has been stuck in the interstices and that pretty much has lived in a sea of hatred for millennia and fed off of the misery of others for millennia, that person has a lot of changing to do. They are the equivalent of a very obese person who needs to be put on a strict diet of pure love. They used to eat junk food, junk emotions. The junk emotions are anger and sadness and shame and humiliation and guilt. And think of the invention of the church, the Catholic Church, that pretty much was created in order to milk human beings of the emotions of shame and humiliation and embarrassment and guilt. And think of all of that energy feeding these blue beings. They didn't eat real food. They grew fat on fake food that they intentionally, farmed and created and ate for themselves. And I send them, and you can too, back to the great central sun as their personal trainer, like diet and exercise program for their energy self. That what that does is erases away all of this. This is all adipose tissue that is made from eating things that aren't real. All of those calories were never real. All of that pain and misery that these beings fed off of and grew fat off of were never real. That's what this little diagram is here. Once you relieve the pressure, once you relieve the crimping of that tube, be it your nerve or be it a hose, all of a sudden all of the water begins to flow again. So it feels like, you have pins and needles, or you have pain, or you have, neuropathy, but that's just because the signals are flowing again. And what we are experiencing right now in this time in the cosmos is the blockages have been removed. I'm talking about the genetic blockages that prevented humanity from connecting to the consciousness of the great central sun for millennia, that caused humanity to accumulate experiences and only give them back to God when you die. Well, those blockages being removed are now allowing for the flow of energy and consciousness to reach that great central sun. And imagine this central consciousness changing colors here. Imagine this central God consciousness being like, all of a sudden getting all this information about what was going on in hell for the past 10 or 12,000 years. Imagine what that would be like. It would be like, oh, I didn't know that all of those horrible things were happening. Now I'm aware of them. Now it's time for me to change them and fix them and heal them. These are the biofeedback signals of the universe getting back to God consciousness so that God consciousness can change and recalibrate and send out new emanations. So this is all being healed. This is all being resolved. All of these beings are going back into the recycling program, and their consciousness is going to be recycled. This is already happening on an individualized basis, like one at a time. But at a certain point, there is a massive recycling program, a cosmic flush that gets all of this energy moving. And that is what we are coming up on. So again, when people talk about the ascension, when people talk about like huge events, it is very important to understand that that event is already in process. It's already been happening, like I say, one by one with these beings that are actually like the adipose tissue of the universe, these fat cells being sent back for recycling to the central processing, central sun of the universe for processing, and that the more of them that get sent back, that the more things change. And eventually there is such a change in energy, in the shift in the energy patterns, that this is a pattern that cannot hold any longer, and it has to flow. So little by little, these consciousnesses have been chipped away, and this is also what is spoken about in a lot of New Age writings and a lot of channeled materials about the archons, Archons, that those would be analogous to these beings that have occupied the meniscus for, millennia, for so very long. They're at the top of the pyramid. They're at the top of the food chain, and they are very, very loath to change. They do not want to relinquish their position of power, and they do not want to have to pay their karmic debts. When I talk about karmic debts, I'm really talking about the refinery of the universe, not a sense of punishment and getting your hand slapped by mommy or daddy or Jesus or an authority figure, more the sense of, oh, you have accumulated this much debt, and now it is time for you to balance the scales. Or, oh, all of this stuff over here is untrue, out of balance. It doesn't actually exist. And what happens when we discard all of that? And when I say discard, we're talking about cancellation waves. So a wave up here like this, plus a wave down here like this, equals cancellation wave, neutrality. That is what we do with all this stuff over here. It becomes canceled out. It becomes no longer active. There's no longer energy that is active in the universe. So I know this is a great deal of energy to absorb, but this contains a lot of not only cosmic truths, but truths that you may apply to your daily, day-to-day existence. Thank you very much for tuning in.